Hello and welcome to Sacred Mindshift Circle. I'm your host, Dahlia Deborah Donalds. And today, my guest is Eloheem Ali, widely known as the philosopher of order, a four-time best-selling author, speaker, and thinker. His work explores structure, self-reliance, consciousness, and the deeper forces shaping human experience. Writing under his public name, he has built a global audience through his books, teachings, and influential presence online. Beyond his public work, he is also a devoted husband and father. His message continues to reach people seeking clarity and inner power in a rapidly changing world. Welcome, Elohim. How are you today?
I'm well. How are you?
Pretty good, pretty good. So tell me a little bit about yourself, about what even made you want to study philosophy, because that is a very deep, I remember in college, that is a very deep topic that not a
Right.
lot of people tend to choose. And then tell me how also you decided to go in further, to study everything related to consciousness and the old religions.
Right. That's a really good question. First and foremost, I started philosophy was like my default brain setting, but I didn't have a name for it. So since I was a kid, it was the way I used to think about things. So like my mom gave me this robot toy, and my first thought was like, how do I know everybody's not a robot? Does everybody have a mind and thoughts like I have? I'm like 4 years old. And so it wasn't until I was going to the 12th grade and I was looking at all these classes, the counselor was like, "Hey, do you want to do philosophy or psychology?" And at first I was like, "Oh, I'll do psychology." And then I was like, "Well, what's philosophy?" And then she was like, "Oh, it's awesome. It's a class where you just get to question reality and the mind." I'm like, "What?" I'm like, "That's a thing? That's been in this school this whole time? Like, there's a class for that?" She was like, "Yeah." I said, "Please, yeah, sign me up." And that was like, I just loved it ever since. And I was like, "I'm going to college for this." So then I went to college and I double majored in philosophy and also in religion. And how I got into consciousness is my obsession since, again, a child, since I can remember about just God. I had a very deep, to this day, I have a deep obsession about God, metaphysical things, things of that nature. And so when I was like a junior in high school, I wanted to like figure out, okay, is God real or not? And so I went and I studied all these different religions in high school. And so I that just got me into spirituality, spirit, consciousness, the mind, because I studied Hinduism, Buddhism, Judaism, Christianity. I mean, everything, the mystics. And so by the time I got to college, that's just what I did for fun. And so that's how I got into both philosophy and also religion.
And you yourself in your household, what was, did you grow up in a spiritual home or were you Christian? Were you Muslim? What was your background in as far as beliefs?
I grew up as a Christian in a Christian home. My father is agnostic. My dad's side is mixed with Muslims and Christians, and so is my mom's side. And people who are just spiritual, like my Aunt Paulette, they call her Mama Paulette. But yeah, just a bunch of very deeply religious, Christians, especially on my mom's side. It's very deeply like my grandmother, my mom. So yeah, I grew up in a very Christian home, but I've always seen multiple different beliefs because the family was diverse, and since my father's agnostic, he was fine with all the religious questions I had.
Yeah, because I imagine a lot of the things that you talk about now is questioning all of the Abrahamic basic religious ideas. And it's interesting because obviously we can't pretend to know everything, and there are a lot of misconceptions. There are a lot of misconceptions. I'm gonna start first talking about your first, well, it's your second book, but we're gonna start with that book first. So
Okay.
you wrote a book and it's called War of Gods, right? I'm sorry, World of the War of Gods. So tell me a little bit about this book, why you wrote it, and what is it about?
Right. So it's actually called World War Gods. I know it's a lot, all three W's. It's World War Gods, the biography of Yahweh. So I'm a big believer in writing something and writing away. So I used to teach. And when I taught, I started learning what the kids liked. They liked rap. So I used to literally take their entire study guides, and I used to make rap out of it. And I used to start the entire lesson by teaching them a rap first, and then from there we used to dig into the depth of history. I was a history teacher. And so people call that edutainment. So I'm a big believer in edutainment. I think if you're going to educate somebody, it's more effective if it's also entertaining. So I teach something called abstract history. It comes out of the philosophy of order. And abstract history, philosophy of order says everything has a matrix and everything has a spirit. So abstract history takes that even further. So if everything has a matrix, a medium or structure in which they develop in, right, or a womb, and everything has a spirit, right? If we're using the ancient animist definition of spirit, right? The vital essence, the collection of attributes that make something what it is. Well, that would mean that everything does actually have a spirit, like animists used to believe. And so, where in normal history, where we wouldn't take gods and angels and spirits seriously, because history is very materialist, is very based on the philosophy of materialism, that the only thing that exists are, physical things. Where in abstract history, we say no. Not only do abstract things actually exist, the mind, consciousness, spirit, but we actually are making the case that it's the spirit or the metaphysical that causes the physical things to happen. And so then when we're talking about somebody like, so I wanted to choose a spirit that everybody cares about, which is Yahweh, right? And Yahweh is a spirit that everybody cares about. And I wanted to tell the story of how you have a spirit that started as a tribal spirit. And that's the big shocker, controversial thing that people don't like to hear. But if you're in normal academia, this is pretty normal stuff. That how would a tribal god start as a tribal god of like the Shasu and then rise into obviously the most powerful, most respected, most idolized spirit or god on the entire planet by far. And so the books, and it's only two out now, but it's a series will be four. The books are to explain that story first in a more dramatic storytelling way that can get everybody engaged. But then after that, there's just a strict abstract history. This is what this spirit has done. This is how it's caused things to happen in history.
So when you start talking about Yahweh, you actually, I saw one of your videos, and you were explaining how his spirit or his, I guess, essence of who he is got mixed in also with the spirit of Jesus or the Most High. So how did that happen? How did they, people read the Bible, and there are things that make you question because you do see a God who does say things like, he's a jealous God. And I don't know if there was this part in the Bible, I don't remember the exact passage now, but a bunch of men had went to get circumcised to marry
Oh, right.
the women in the Bible, and then God just said, no, no, annihilate them. And I was like, that was the first time was reading, and I was like, oh my God, like that,
Oh, yeah.
but if you don't know the Bible, you don't, but if you ever read the Bible and you read that story, you're like, what in the world? But
Yeah.
it is not the same one that, it's not the image that like Yeshua, Jesus kind of paints of God, right? So tell me how they intertwined historically over time, the spirit of Yahweh and the God of Jesus. Put it that way.
Right. This is good. So first, I'm gonna give you just the academic consensus on this, and I'm going to give you mine's, which comes a little bit outside the academic consensus. So the academic consensus is just simply you have, and let's go back to the Bronze Age. Okay, so you have ancient Egypt, you have Canaan, you have all these different Middle Eastern cultures or these Mesopotamian cultures, and they all share things in common. And so you have a tribe called the Shasu tribe, which is a lot of people don't know the oldest writing of the name Yahweh we actually have in historical records is in Africa, North Africa, ancient Egypt. So, but they're writing it as a negative. They're saying that it's Shasu and his God. This is like bad. We don't like these people. And so Yahweh at this time was a God of a rebellious people, which if you actually read the Bible, this is pretty consistent. But it's a God of a rebellious people who are rebelling against Egypt. And they're in the Levant. He's coming out of the south region, Edom, the Midianite region. He's coming from there into Canaan. So when Yahweh gets into Canaan, you already have a god there that's already a storm god, that's a masculine god, and that's Baal, Hadad, right? And Baal comes up in the Bible. And so they immediately begin to clash, these two spirit. Well, these two, academically, they wouldn't say spirits. These two, deities begin to clash, cultures begin to clash, and Yahweh comes out on top. And when Yahweh comes out on top, he actually begins to take some of the stories and he begins to take some of the physical attributes that Baal had, like having horns. And a lot of people don't like Yahweh being depicted with horns, but Yahweh was at the time depicted with horns because in the Canaan Empire, if you were a powerful god, you had horns. Horns were not demonic yet. That was not a notion culturally. Horns were divine and they were a sign of divine protection. But then there you also had at the time El, who becomes in the Bible El Elyon, God the Most High. And El was the father god of this mythology. You have these Most High gods through all different religions. Yahweh takes through time, not originally, because that's why Israel has the name of El in it instead of Yahweh. But you can see this through history where you get, instead of these El names, you start getting these Yahweh names, these Yahshua, right? You get these Elijah, right? You get a lot of these Yah names later, but originally you get Mikael, Gabriel, Israel. And so you're going from people who exclusively worship Yahweh to people who, or I should say, people who worship Yahweh and many other gods, to people who exclusively worship Yahweh. And that's called monolatry or henotheism. After that happens, people begin to go into like, no, actually, we're not just saying our God's the most important God. We're saying that our God is the only God that exists. Now, once you get into that monotheism, so then you have to ask the question, is Yahweh then El? Because if El is the top God and Yahweh is the only God in the world, then Yahweh surely must be El. And so what you get is a lot of scribes, they go back into what we call today the Old Testament, but these are just scribes, they were all separate at the time. They start editing it out. And we know that because we have older sources that separate Yahweh from the Most High. And then we have, like, for example, the Dead Sea Scrolls. But then when we get to the Masoretic text, we get, we get Yahweh and El are the same God, and Yahweh is not a son of El, Yahweh is El. And so you get a lot of that editing later on. Now, from an abstract history perspective, civilizational gods are always combating one another, right? Because they need human belief and worship to maintain. And so Yahweh and Baal are fighting because you have two gods that are almost the same. They're not the same, but they're close. So the same kind of people who worship Baal are the same kind of people who are going to worship Yahweh. And so since both of them are sustained by worship, it's about pulling one group over to me to worship me instead of you. And that's how I make another God weaker and make me more mightier. And so the relationship that these people had with the Most High, Yahweh eventually, without going too deep into it, he gets those worshipers. So instead of worshiping El Elyon or the Most High God of the universe, they give that worship now to Yahweh. And then he kind of takes on that title eventually.
So when you try to explain these kind of concepts to people, especially people who or consider themselves Jewish or consider themselves Christian or Muslim, what is the reaction? Because obviously it's that's a pretty big shocker, I guess, for a lot of people if they haven't studied like Gnosticism, especially, like
Mhm.
because I think some things in Gnosticism kind of hint at that,
Mhm.
there's some kind of demiurge, some kind of other deity who is running things, but that's not the one that's coming from inside you, that's coming from source. So how do people react to that normally when you try to explain these kinds of facts about Yahweh and God and all of this?
Yeah, most of them, most obviously just don't like it, right? They call me a Gnostic, an Antichrist, or whatever. But that's understandable because if you were taught your whole life that there's only one God, first of all, and that one God is Yahweh, and then someone comes and says, actually, Yahweh is one of many gods, and was originally perceived as the son of the Most High God. That, I mean, that's complete destruction of most people's religions. But one, I try to tell them I'm not claiming that Yahweh is good or evil. I don't really do that. I'm not making any objective. Like a Gnostic would make the claim that Yahweh is evil. I'm not making a claim that Yahweh is good or evil. I'm just making the claim to trust Yahweh when Yahweh says who he is, which is I am a jealous God. I'm a God of war. Like there are gods of war and gods of, and I mean that's it's pretty self-explanatory if you read the Bible as it is. I mean, you have to kind of put your own church values into the Bible to make it something other than what it says. But a lot of what I'm saying, if you just read the Old Testament or the Torah, it's pretty plain. I mean, Yahweh doesn't try to hide what kind of God he is. He's really over the top, explanatory, and repeats it over and over and over again, especially when people disobey him. So it's not like I'm saying something other than what Yahweh would say about himself. What's happening is I call it the Bible spell. So, when I say spell, I'm not talking about a magician. When I say spell, I'm talking about the original meaning of the word Old English. It meant a story or a narrative. So sit down for a spell or gospel. That was the good story, the good news. So spell meant a story. So I say if a story is in your subconscious mind, you're under a spell and you don't know. So when people read stories in the Bible, they're reading them as a univocal text, meaning they think it's from one voice. They think this is like multiple perception is God gave somebody this text and this is what God says. But that's if anybody reads again, and anybody who studies the Bible in academics, they know this. Even Christians who study the Bible in academics, they know this. The Bible has a very sloppy history. It is truly a collection of text from a culture, and same thing with the New Testament. And over time, people have edited, redacted things, put things in, taking things out of certain scribes. But we got to realize that each of them are being told by somebody with their own opinion on God. They claim to be divinely inspired, and then on top of that, some of them are just poems. Some of them aren't even necessarily about God. They're literally just a library of what a group of people were thinking and going through at specific set points in time. So when you understand that, then you can have a better understanding like, oh, okay, so just because this part says this about Yahweh or just this about Jesus of Nazareth doesn't mean that God is saying that. This is somebody's interpretation of maybe a vision they got, a dream they had, or they're writing down an oral story that was passed down for generations. And once people allow themselves to get out of that Bible story, to just realize, okay, we're not saying that the gods are fake, but there isn't a book in which Yahweh or God of the universe or even Jesus of Nazareth or Yahshua sat down and wrote. Those don't exist. What we have are different books that men wrote about the God they worshiped or edited about the God they worship that groups decided to put together into one book, excluding other ones and including or editing ones in there. And once you realize that, I feel like it's a lot easier to come to terms with some of the things that I'm saying.
Yeah, and I'm just gonna do a little disclaimer for my audience. I'm not saying the Bible is bad. There are good things in there that you can get from it. I'm not gonna lie, like after after going and learning about the other kinds of books and texts that were omitted from the New Testament that would really help explain how this world works, like all the good stuff. I mean, most of the stuff is there that Jesus says, in the New
Right,
Testament. But if
right,
you had the context
right,
from the other books, it would make it way easier to kind of understand how this world actually works. So, like you said, when they want to, whoever, obviously in Rome, they were going and deciding what was going to get put in there and what was going to get taken out. So when I look at the Bible now, even, there are things in the Old Testament that I like. I do take the good things that I feel like, I guess that's at the end of the day, that's what we all do, right? You take the good things that I feel are more in harmonious with the Most High, and then those stories about annihilating a whole group of I
right,
just look at that and say, that sounds a little bit like sacrificial blood work. You can see it better now, so you
right.
can see where it seems as if there was a mix up of characteristics from the different deities that they're trying to say is just one. So okay, so very good in terms of like explaining that to me. I just wanted to ask you now, what do you think as far as people because you talk a lot about also like civilization, and I feel like when people get told these kind of things about especially their beliefs, they tend to, I guess, go into denial and all of this. Why do you think you said once you described civilization almost as like a zoo for humans? In terms of how we've been indoctrinated, why would you say that?
I love that question, and actually connects to what you were saying right before there about the Bible. My favorite book in the Bible is Genesis, specifically the beginning of Genesis, the fall of man with Adam and Eve. Probably my favorites are, and they all have to do with what you're talking about. Genesis, John, Revelation are probably my favorites. I do like Proverbs and probably Psalms as well. And they all actually have a little bit to do with what you're saying. So, um, from the perspective of, Genesis, right? I want to start with there. So when we read the story of Adam and Eve, a lot of us read it very literally. But what I always say is, if you really look at it, you're talking about a people who are nude or naked, living one or in harmony with nature. So you're literally talking about foragers or hunter-gatherers, right? You're talking about this time of people who are living one with the forest, with the animals and the trees and such and things of that nature. But then, by the way, you see this across different mythologies. You can read this in the Greeks' Golden Age. You can, this is pretty common. So I look at this as like cultural memory. All right. But and from there, you get this whole interruption of all the greatness is happening. And there's garden or forest. And the interruption is this knowledge that is, I would say that is, but this knowledge of good and evil, or that is good and evil. And people always debate what this apple was metaphorically. And I love the debate. But to me, if you want to know what it was, you should look at what they would say, like the fruits of it, right? So what are the curses and the things and the declarations that are made to Adam after eating them? Well, it says you will till the field. Because you've done this, you have cursed the ground. It says like, so it starts talking about, anybody can go back and look at it. It starts talking about agriculture. It starts talking about now instead of eating from the trees, you will eat from the ground. And it starts talking about you will eat bread. And it starts talking about you will till the fields. And it starts talking, I mean, literally, it starts getting into agriculture. It tells the woman that she will no longer be equal to man, which people try to, there's a lot of editing that also happened in Genesis. The way it's translated is actually a bit misogynist because, and I don't use that term lightly, because where it says the rib part is that's a very weird translation. So I believe the Hebrew word was something like tesel or something of that nature. I'm probably pronouncing it wrong, but that word actually everywhere else in the Old Testament is translated as equal side of. So equal side of. So meaning originally it was saying that God took out an equal side of Adam. So, and it made, but they didn't want that because they didn't want the terminology equal. And that kind of plays back into hunter-gatherers. So if anybody looks up like hunter-gatherers, especially in like very warm places, they're extremely egalitarian. Like not kinda egalitarian, I mean everybody's equal in the society, extremely egalitarian. And so not only is in this part of the scriptures it talking about, you know, agriculture, but it's even talking about some of the things that happen under agriculture. As soon as agriculture happens in a society, so as soon as hunter-gatherers transition to agriculture, women automatically become unequal in this society, almost immediately. And I could go into all the reasons why, but it also goes into birth. I will multiply your birth pains or your birth, and depending on the translation. And in agriculture, women go from hunter-gatherers having 4 to 5 children to having 12 to 15 kids in agriculture. And then after that, Adam and Eve have 2 sons. It gets really deep. I'm going to stop after this explanation and go more into civilization. But you get Cain and you get Abel. And people always struggle with this as well. I did as a kid because it's like, why did God favor Abel? And people say because Cain, his heart wasn't good. He didn't really mean it when he gave. But if you look at it through the lens I'm giving you, then you have a bit of a different perception of it. Because Cain is an agriculturalist, right? He grows his food from the ground. Abel is a herder and so therefore more connected to nature. He's not growing things from the ground. And God is accepting Abel's, but he's not accepting Cain's. And then so Cain gets jealous and he kills Abel. Now, the reason why this is so important, again, when we're looking at anthropology and history of hunter-gatherers into agriculturalists and herders and such, because what happens in the Bible is actually something we have recorded in history. So you get agriculturalists who start going around like Cain's children and they begin to kill herders and hunter-gatherers. This is actually a big deal. They start wiping them out, especially in the Middle East area where these stories are supposed to be taking part. This group comes in, they start wiping all of them out, they start killing all of them because they want to spread their agriculture, their civilization. And then I'll leave it with this. Cain is the inventor, the first ever to build a city. And so this is literally the anthropology direction timeline we're talking about here. Hunter gatherer, something happens, so we become agriculturalists. Some of us become herders, and then the agriculturalists start killing the herders and hunter gatherers, and then they start building cities. And you actually see that story repeat. Now, the reason why I bring that up is because that story is in multiple cultures. And what's happening is civilization, we were told that it was good for us. We were told that all this was great for us, farming was great. But if you look at it, farming depletes the soil, right? Because civilizations are made of two things, agriculture and centralized government. Those are the two things you need to have a civilization. And so the agriculture depletes the soil, and as it or curses the soil, as Genesis was able to deplete the soil. And so now you must move out. So what you gotta do? You gotta destroy the trees. Right? Now, animals, though, they want what you got. So now you got to kill the animals. But eventually you're going to run into herders and hunter-gatherers or other civilizations. So what you got to do? You got to go to war. But now you created a population that's so big and you got to feed this population. So what do you need? You need slaves. And literally, slavery, war, all these things start with agriculture. And so we are living in a mismatch, like an animal in a zoo. So a lion, it's you go if you visit a zoo, a lion is sad, a chimpanzee is sad. It would sound ridiculous if I said, that lion needs to get up and be grateful that he's alive and he's being fed, right? That's what they would tell you, and that he's safe. They would tell you in a civilization because depression only goes up in civilizations. But the reality is, you're dealing with an evolutionary mismatch. So we all evolved for one world, but we live in another. And now our purpose, in which we naturally have as organisms of the planet, is replaced with purposes they give you, like careerism and working a 9 to 5 for the rest of your life until you die, because they convince you as a child that's what you're made to do.
Yeah, that's a fascinating exploration of that idea coming straight out of the Bible because I would have never put those two together. So in your opinion, we were always meant to be kind of like on the move, like herders and what in your book you have the first this is the first book that you wrote. Is it called Fams?
So the first book I worked is actually weird. It's called The First Book. But and then
Okay.
and then there's FAMS, and then there's the second book, literally called the second book. And then there's World War Gods Episode 1, World War Gods Episode 2.
Hmm. So what you have the one book where you talk about, I know, trying to be self-reliant and so that we don't fall into that 9 to 5 system. Tell me a little bit about it.
Yeah, so in order to escape out of something like a civilization, which I call, a devouring mother, something that takes from you without giving back, right? Um, a lot of us try to legislate behavior. So it's like people who, and I'm not judging anybody who spanks their kids, but it's like, when you spank your kid, you think that you're getting rid of behavior, but you're really just moving the behavior out of your vision because they're going to, go and do it. They're just not going to do it in front of you. And so your government thinks the same way. You think, not you, but you watching me think the same way about your New Year's resolution. Everybody comes up with the same New Year's resolution every single year because you're trying to write a rule and then say, I'm going to live by that rule. But really, that's not how behaviors work. That's not how things change. In order for things to change, you have to have a matrix. A matrix means, if you look up the etymology, it means mater, which means a womb. So it's a medium or structure in which you develop in. So a lot of people want to stop corruption. They want to stop tyrannical governments. They want to stop all these things. So they create rules, they create legislations. this is not going to do anything because you live in a matrix that gives birth to that spirit. So this is why you'll see connecting again to the Bible, they say you got to wipe out Babylon. You got to wipe it out. You can't be in Babylon and say, "Oh, we're going to make Babylon better." No, it has to be. You cannot partake in it, and that's why. And though it seems unfair in the Bible, you'll see innocent people will suffer for sins they did not commit. But that's because if you're living in the matrix, like if you live in a city, right? Then if somebody sends off a nuke, they're going to send it to a city. It doesn't matter if you're innocent or not. It's kind of what a city attracts. That's where the large population is. If there's going to be a disease outbreak, the worst place to be is a city, right? If there's going to be anything that goes wrong worldwide in your nation, the place is going to hit the worst is the city. And so it doesn't matter if you're innocent or not. That's the matrix that you live in. It kind of creates those conditions. So in order to escape what I call the devouring mother, the shadow matrix that takes and depletes you, you have to create a matrix. And that matrix is called FAMS: food, forest, foraging, hunting, anti-fragile, modern society. And really, what it is kind of like a return back to the garden. So it's a way for people to go back to living as humans are supposed to be living without abandoning things like technology, using technology that's good for us and good for the earth.
So basically, in your opinion, this can be done because I know a lot of people will say like, how am I gonna just give up everything and I'm working and I don't know like how to even go into doing that because there are people who have done it like they go off the grid, but for the majority of the people they find that like so difficult. So how would you um you know tell people or suggest to people ways to become self-reliant and to go back to nature?
Well, I mean, there's three main ways I would say. Number one, the way that I'm doing, which is first focus on becoming financially free, meaning, running your own hours, running your own work time. Doesn't mean quit your job right now, but like originally, like I was working a job, I would save up money to get into the things I really want to get into. And then when my home business was making more than my job, I quit my job so that I can do my home business, right? So like working up to that, and then you can kind of start taking your money and putting it where you want, working on things as you want, like getting land. Then buy an acre, buy 2 acres, and you can start there. But the other way is to kind of group economics. That's my favorite way because not everybody can go and start a business. I agree. Like some people tell me, "Hey man, that's cool that you did that, but I'm not. I can't start a business. That's not my thing. I'm not good at that kind of stuff." Fine. There's group economics. So try to get. So the way I see that is start simple. Get a plant, one plant that feeds you, one plant that is medicine, and then tell somebody about the book FAMS. Read it with them. Talk to them about it, and buy more plants, learn more about that, get more people in your group. Eventually, you'll get a group of people doing the same thing you're doing, interested in the same thing you're interested in, and then y'all can pool your money together and use group economics to go buy some land and get started. But I do want to tell people there's a massive difference from simply going off grid and doing FAMS because FAMS is you have to live as a technologically advanced hunter-gatherer pretty much. And so you're building a food forest and not a farm. Farms are just going to get you back in the same old system that we're in right now. And speaking as somebody who grows food in his yard and has chickens and such, farming is just as hard as working a 9 to 5, if not harder. Permaculture, growing your own food forest, creating systems that mimic nature, way easier, way less work. So definitely don't just do off grid. I would say specifically create a food forest, become a hunter gatherer, and still use technology.
So now after we just discussed this, like where do you see us going in the future? Because we're going into 2026 and there are a lot of different things happening in this world right now. Do you really see let's say, dismantling more or less of let's say the matrix, like that 9 to 5 mentality and all of the different old beliefs? Are you seeing that happen more and more, especially since you're putting up a lot of these videos on TikTok? Do you
Yeah,
see
I
it
mean,
being received
you
warmly?
okay. Yeah, so I talk about this often. There's a book called The Four Turnings. It's a very good book. It's not my book. It's two historians who wrote it. The generations that everybody uses, like Generation Z, Generation, like all those, they come from them. They were literally just trying to figure out, learn about generations, but then they found this weird thing. They said, why these generations pretty much act the same every 80 years? It's like we're getting the same generation. And then they found out, no, they're not just getting the same generation every 80 years. They're getting the same four cycles. So each cycle lasts about 20 years. And every civilization does this. So we probably don't have the time to really get as deep as I normally would get into this. So I won't explain like the fourth dimensions kind of stuff. I'll in time loops, but I'll get into how, everybody today, you think you're doing something different, but you realize you've been doing the same thing for years. And you're like, man, I've made that mistake before, or I dated this kind of person already. Why am I doing the same thing over and over again? So sometimes we get trapped in these kind of time loops. And because entropy exists, things age, we think that things are changing. But just because things are aging doesn't necessarily mean that things are changing. And so, what happens is civilization has the same loops over and over and over. You start with the what they call the high, when everybody's excited. So if you go back about 80 years, everybody's excited. They're like, yeah, the world's gonna be great. And then right after that, you get what's called the awakening. So you think back to like all the hippies and like the Black Panther Party and stuff, when everybody's kind of like, no, man, something's up. The government is not to be trusted. And then you get into the unraveling. And so think about this as like the 80s and the 90s, when everything starts kind of falling apart, when, people start just like everything just seems like it's no longer going towards a positive direction. And then you get the crisis, which for us started in 2008. And so the crisis started with the Great Recession. And so crises are normally riddled with either economic collapse, like the Great Depression, that was around 87, 70 so years ago. And or sometimes you get stuff like the bird flu or coronavirus, right? And then, you get war. Think back to World War II again, 80 years ago-ish. And think about how the geopolitical climate is going on today. And you also get some sort of new technology that normally resets everything. Think AI. So we are certainly getting to a point where you're going to get another kind of reset. Now, rich people always take advantage of this. They know it's coming. They've studied this, so they always get ready for that. But where we could take advantage of it for is like we always make the same decision. So eventually, by the way, like a civilization will do this cycle multiple times until eventually just completely collapses. So you never know when that's going to happen. This could be America's last cycle. I mean, I'm not hoping for that at all. Just let everybody know. This could be America's last cycle, though. And you never know when it's the last cycle of a civilization. You just never know. Um, but either way, at the end of this cycle, there's always like a window during a crisis period where we always have an opportunity. We always have, and same thing in your life. Like when you're in that crisis period, when everything is going bad, it's actually also a window there. There's always a window of opportunity to actually make a different decision, not to go back in the same cycle. What I argue for everybody is that we can do something new. We can do something amazing. We can create a new kind of society. We don't have to keep living this kind of life. We really don't. We feel like we have to because we've kind of been brainwashed in that, but we really can do something new. So I do think today we're going to lead into, I think a war is coming. I hope it's not a brutal war, but I do think a war is coming. I do think AI is going to be a major disruptor. I don't know how exactly. And I do think you have about 2008 is when it started. You have probably somewhere around 2028, give a year, take a year, 2027, 2029, 2028, somewhere around there where things are going to get pretty bad for most people. But again, we can use that as an opportunity to do something great and to do something amazing.
Well, thank you so much, Elohim, for joining me today and for giving me all of that information and all that knowledge also to my audience because I like it's a pleasure to actually just sit down and like hear all of this and like flow and yeah, and I do think that I don't know, like I feel like we have two groups, right? I feel like there's gonna be a group of people that can see through everything, like you said. and choose that window to escape that kind of lifestyle. And then I feel like they're going to be those people that are just going to
I
just
agree.
sink in there. So I don't know, but we'll see how it all unfolds. But if anybody wants any more information related to Elohim and his books or his web page or his sites, I'm gonna leave everything in the description. And please be sure to also subscribe to sacredmindshift.com, Sacred Mindshift Circle, so that you never miss an important event or podcast. And thank you so much, Elohim, for joining me.
Yeah. Thank you.